Welcome back to Movie Recaps. Today, I'll share with you a romantic drama from 1954. Elizabeth Taylor and Van Johnson star in The Last Time I Saw Paris. The train station was crowded, and the whistle blew as Charles Wills, played by Van Johnson, exited and hailed a taxi. He stops on a bridge and briefly takes in the surroundings before he walked around some more. He finally enters a little cafe where he admired the picture of a beautiful woman on the wall. As he smiled at the picture, the bartender, Maurice, who seemed to be an old friend, passed him and they greeted each other joyfully, then sat and chatted about how life had been, specifically his. Charles started to remember the celebrations that happened after the war, in which he was a sergeant in the U.S. Army. There was a large crowd of people on the street, and in the midst of the celebrations, a beautiful woman that looked familiar to the picture we saw earlier grabbed him and kissed him, then simply disappeared into the crowd. Charles staggered into the cafe where Maurice worked. There, another beautiful woman named Marion Ellswirth caught his eye. She sat with another man that sought after her, Claude Mateen. Marion invited both men to join the celebrations being hosted by her father. Charles held her interestedly and left with her. All three now arrived at her father's home, and Claude quickly disappeared into the lively party being held there, while Marion introduced Charles to her father, James Ellsworth. While scoping the crowd, Charles notices the woman that kissed him earlier in the crowd. He realized she was Marion's sister Helen. Marion questioned what her sister was doing there and learned she was being expelled from the university. She stepped off, threatening to have a talk with her younger sister later. Charles and Helen were eventually left alone to converse, and they sat on the stairs while doing so. Charles advised Helen that she had kissed him earlier, and she, trying in vain to remember, kissed him yet another time to help jolt her memory. During the conversation, she learned Charles was not rich, and he learned that despite the extravagant party, neither were they. James just chose to live that way. After that, their father rejoined them on the stairs, admitting that the turnout was more than he expected, and he was running out of alcohol. Charles and Helen made their way up the stairs to get some more alcohol for the party. Marion, who saw them go off, looked on defeatedly. In the room, they continued their conversation, and Charles learned James had been in World War I and had been celebrating ever since, while Helen found out Charles was from Milwaukee. They collected the alcohol and made their way back downstairs, where Marion quickly intercepted them and hung onto his arm, in the hope of breaking the connection she saw him and her little sister building. They agreed to try and meet up later, and Charles left the party so he could actually go get some work done, as he was also a reporter for the newspaper. The scene changed to Charles at work answering a call from Helen, where they joked for a bit. He gave her a message to give her sister, stating where she could meet him later on that night. Helen, however, never gave her sister the message and went to meet him instead, where they kissed as the lights came on and the celebration continued. The scene changed again to both of them sitting outside, where she had fallen asleep on his arm as he hugged her. As they started off for her home, she made him promise to never let the celebration end, as she was tired of death. She told him she didn't care if he was rich. They kissed again and brought that scene to a close. Charles stopped by the Ellsworth household bearing gifts. Helen, very hyper and happy to see him, met him outside and led him into the house, while Marion looked on displeased and disappointed at her sister and Charles' budding friendship. James invited Charles to tag on to a gambling opportunity that could make them rich. Charles, however, was the one expected to bring the bulk of the investment, but he only had $40 and suggested he could borrow money. Marion immediately told him not to because her father would ensure Charles become as broke as he was. James then spoke of deeds he had for lands supposedly filled with oil, but his daughters laughed at him, advising Charles that it was a family joke, as their father had bought the lands but had yet to see one drop of oil spew from it. Charles eventually left, promising to see what he could come up with. Now, at the horse race, where Charles had borrowed money valued at half a year's pay, James worried about the horse's capability to win the race. They were all relieved, though, to find that the horse they had bet on had won his race. It was then Charles found out that there was no hot tip, and that James just picked a horse and hoped for the best. Back at Maurice's bar, men from the army gathered around the radio listening to the status of the war in other areas of the world. Charles came in and met Helen, where they exchanged a kiss as their relationship continued to bloom. The men questioned Charles about when they would be returning home. Charles sent them off and went to sit with Helen to have an intimate moment, spurring from their excitement of the war finally being over soon, as Japan had surrendered. They part ways in the rain outside as he had to go back to work, and she made her way home. Charles caught up with Marion one day just as she was trying to avoid him seeing her. She still liked him very much. He asked her if Helen had gotten all his flowers and messages, to which she responded positively as she looked at him longingly. Charles entered the room where Helen lied in a hospital bed as she was just recovering from a near-death case of the flu because she had run in the rain on the night they had parted ways. He told her he loved her as they continued to talk about various topics, including the fact that he wished he was rich. He was just about to leave to complete writing his book when she asked why couldn't he write it there. She then asked him to marry her, and after brief conversation, he agreed. The scene changed to James talking to Charles about marriage to his daughter. He told him that he was not the husband he wanted for Helen, as he wanted her to marry rich. He, however, liked Charles and gave them his blessing, as well as the land he owned that spewed no oil, as a gift to Charles and Helen for their wedding present. Marion also revealed that she had accepted Claude's invitation of marriage. She still liked Charles very much, but she gave up on it because she had obviously lost any chance of being with him to her sister. Charles revealed that Helen, his wife, had delivered a baby and he was struggling to make ends meet. He tried borrowing from his co-workers, but they had nothing to lend as times were hard. Charles rushed home and hurriedly greeted Claude, who stood in the foyer. He ran upstairs and told Helen that he had gotten a loan so they could pay the hospital. Claude advised Charles that he had gotten a job as a prosecutor, to which Charles responded that he would be getting less pay than in his private practice. Claude stated that this was more important. Charles came under stress as he continued trying to provide for his family with his day job, while still lending James money and trying to complete his novel. He received notice that the book he had worked so hard on was not suitable for publishing, and that it was being returned. 5 years had now passed since the end of World War II. Charles continued working on perfecting his novel, having Helen do a read-through of it. She loved it and told him it was even better than the first one. He even had his daughter kiss it for good luck, yet it was rejected by the publishers still. Amidst all the struggles Charles faced, Helen still managed to keep up her partying lifestyle. Charles decided not to tell Helen his book was rejected again in the hopes of keeping her happy. She was so ingrained in the partying lifestyle and completely unaware of the struggles Charles faced just to keep his family afloat. Back at work, Charles' boss sent him to cover a story about an American woman who caused traffic because she played in the fountain. His coworkers laughed at him when they found out it was his wife who did this. He left, disappointed, to deal with her. Charles and Helen disagreed with her behavior, she thinking it was fun to behave in this manner and him frustrated with her. But it wasn't really her he was frustrated with. It was the fact that his coworker was able to sell on the Evening Post to the tune of $15,000 and he was still there struggling. He wasn't very happy. Helen and Charles went back to Maurice's, where an artist had started a painting of Helen frolicking in the fountain on the wall of the cafe. Charles went upstairs where his daughter lay sleeping to avoid everyone else's excited stupor. His daughter soon woke up, very excited to see her dad and to show him her dance. She fell on her second attempt in front of Barney, one of Charles' co-workers, who came to tell him of a job he was passing off to him, to interview a woman by the name of Lorraine Quarrel. Charles quickly checked on his daughter to ensure she was well and encouraged her to continue doing her best. Charles went to meet the subject of his interview at a restaurant bar. The bartender quickly pointed her out to him the moment she arrived. Lorraine was a professional interviewee and started answering questions before he had even asked. She was a high society woman who had been married 3 times. The interview soon turned into a date of sorts, at the end of which Charles and Lorraine ran into Claude and Marion. They had a very awkward exchange before parting ways. Charles spent the rest of the night with Lorraine, effectively cheating on his wife. The next morning when he arrived home, he started practicing what the argument between him and Helen would sound like, all the while letting out how frustrated he was at her lifestyle and how he felt about the fact that he was not as successful as he had hoped. He entered the room and found her sound asleep. He woke her to find that she didn't seem the least bit concerned for where he had been and why he was only now just getting home. It was only when he started to tell her how he had spent the evening with a beautiful woman who was rich and continued stressing the matter that she started questioning about the woman. He kissed her, though, and told her he loved her and ended that conversation. Soon after, a phone call came in advising them both that the family lands that had been gifted to them as a wedding present had started to gush oil, to the tune of about 80 barrels per day. They soon began to enjoy all the finer things in life. Charles quit his job, and James and Helen started hosting their own parties. Helen found Charles in his room in complete despair because even though he was no longer struggling to make ends meet, His books kept being rejected, and his anger boiled over as he couldn't take the rejection anymore. Charles sat at the cafe, arm wrestling a gentleman for money. He seemed to be the one that now started living very carefree, while Helen was a bit more concerned and asked him to take her home after his small victory. Back at their home, Charles typed away as Helen came to him with a meal. He asked if there had been any calls and was sad to hear that there was none. She conversed with him for a while, then encouraged him to continue working on his book. His daughter came in next, a little sad because she had lost her tooth and swore never to smile again. He, however, cheered his daughter up until she began smiling. James entered next, trying to convince Charles to work on his book another day and attend the race with him. Helen, who had started to become quite level-headed during Charles' bout of despair, tried to encourage him to focus on his book instead. James introduced an English tennis player by the name of Paul to Charles and Helen. The player at once admired Helen, recognizing her as the girl from the painting in Maurice's cafe, Café Dingo. Charles tried to exert his dominance. Helen, unfortunately and disappointedly, found that though Charles had sat there typing away, he had written nothing but nonsensical ramblings on the paper. Charles continued his newfound desire to party, while Helen and Paul danced in each other's arms at the party. Charles intervened and continued dancing with Helen. They shortly bumped into Lorraine, the high society woman who had been divorced 3 times already and was now on her 4th marriage. Soon, Paul came back and resumed dancing with Helen, and the seemingly drunken Charles immediately took Lorraine in his arms. They danced until they both exited the room to go outdoors privately. Helen, now visibly upset, followed them and asked Charles to take her home. He refused and went off in his sports car with Lorraine, not caring who took Helen home, even if it was Paul. After the party, Vicky, Helen and Charles' daughter, went up to her father with a glass of milk to help cure his hangover from his extensive partying. James had just come home himself. Helen entered and told her daughter to get her coat, and they left him there. Charles found Helen and Vicky at the park, where Helen asked him about the night he and Lorraine drove off. He told her nothing happened between them, but she was still not happy about it and was convinced that something would happen the next time he was drunk and with her. Helen told him Paul took her back to his hotel for a nightcap, where she had to battle with herself to not cheat on her husband, considering all she thought was going on with him on his late-night drive. Helen pressured Charles to let them head back to America in an effort to save their marriage. They acknowledged how they had both switched roles. She had matured and he had become very carefree. He invited her to attend the race with him, and she refused and left him there. He took Lorraine to the race instead, where he crashed and lost the race. Back at Café Dingo, Charles finds Helen with Paul having a drink. Charles was very upset and soon started a fight with Paul. He wasn't able to successfully deliver a punch, though, and fell to the ground. Helen took Paul and they both left Charles there. He soon after stumbled home and passed out on the stairs drunk out of his mind. Helen, back with Paul at his hotel, started to realize Paul didn't truly love her and only wanted her as a mistress. She left him there and went home. The door was latched from the inside, however, and Charles was still passed out on the stairs. She walked off alone in the pouring rain until she got to her sister's home. By that point, she passed out in her sister's arms and had to be rushed to the hospital. Charles came to visit her there amidst Marion's death stares at him. She had caught pneumonia again. He held her in his arms as she whispered her goodbyes to him. This time, she did not survive the illness. He sat by her bedside for a long time, just staring at her and crying in despair. Helen's funeral happened, and Marion petitioned the courts to get full custody of Vicky. Charles could not deal with any more loss, so he went back to Milwaukee in America. Now, back in present day, Charles has returned to Paris and sat with Maurice, his friend, at the Café Dingo where the movie began. He had quit drinking and got his life together, though he wasn't rich anymore as the lands had stopped spewing oil. Maurice begged Charles to return, but he wasn't sure about it. Charles then turns up bearing gifts to try and persuade Marion to let him have his daughter again. He found James there and saw he had received a stroke and was now in a wheelchair. James complimented him on his new book. Claude entered with Vicky, who he hugged and reconnected with. Claude welcomed him and also complimented him on his new book. He allowed him to take Vicky to the park, where she rode the rides and he spent time with her and they talked about her mom. Vicky asked if she could live with him because even though she was happy with her aunt, she wasn't perfectly happy. She practically begged him to let her live with him. They now returned to the house, and there, Marion and Charles greeted again for the first time in years. Charles tried to prove himself to Marion before he asked her if he could have his child again. He begged her to return his daughter, as he couldn't live anymore without her. She refused him in anger, as all she could remember was how he had locked Helen out and had caused her death. She walked away, and Charles left. Claude tried to convince her to let him have his daughter because she wasn't only upset that he caused her sister's death, but that Charles hadn't returned the love she had for him, but instead had married Helen so many years ago. Claude advised her she couldn't have everything she wanted, as he, in the same way, didn't have all her love. Back at the cafe, Charles sat and stared at the painting of Helen. Marion walked in and told him she didn't think Helen would have wanted him to be alone, and turned Vicky over in his care. He took his child happily, and they walked off together. A film filled with classic romance and a whole lot of drama. It is an excellent watch. If you like this video, hit the like button. If you love it, subscribe for more.